Hello to all my people, and if you're watching live, checking us out on YouTube, or listening on your favorite podcast provider, you are most definitely my people. Welcome to another episode of Botch Bots and Chair Shots. I'm your host, a chef by trade and a mark by choice. I am the Will Gray, and joining me tonight is the beer-swilling, cigar-chomping mouth puncher known as the Beer City Bruiser. Matt, thanks for coming on. Chat about some wrestling, brother. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited. I was looking forward to this conversation. We've had Brian on the show. He's an alumni and a friend. So when you and I started talking, I was like, yeah, finish the bouncers out, knock them both out. So my first question is always kind of the same, no matter who's sitting in your chair, man. What was your early exposure like? What do you remember watching as a kid growing up?
When I was growing up, my first exposure to wrestling was the AWA, and I saw Bruiser Brody versus Stan Hansen live, and it like just hooked me right away. Like I was obsessed with Brody. So I got to where I grew up in Wisconsin. There, we got to watch WWF, and then we also had the NWA. Then ESPN would play like AWA and WCCW and stuff like that on a loop. And then because I was so obsessed with Brody, I got into tape trading. So I discovered Japanese wrestling pretty early, and Puerto Rican wrestling and stuff like that, and it grew from there.
So when you decided, okay, I'm going to be a pro wrestler, what was the process like of deciding where you were going to get into training and kind of starting the process of being a wrestler?
So me and my buddies, we always got together for pay-per-views and stuff like that, and we'd drink and have a good time. Then we go out in the front of our backyard and just beat the crap out of each other. And at one of these parties, a guy was there, and he goes, "Are any of you guys interested in being professional wrestlers?" And I was like, "Well, yeah." He goes, "Well, my neighbor is a professional wrestler, and they just did something for the news where they had a ring set up, and they were taking yarders, and they were showing them like this is what real wrestling is, and then offering training." And I was like, "Well, I'll be interested in that." So he introduced me to a guy named Jet Bennett, who to this day I'm still really good friends with. And so if you picture it, it's 11 o'clock at night. I'm half in the bag, knocking on a random guy's door, saying, "Hey, I'd like to be a wrestler." And he wrote a list of people that I could get a hold of. One of them was actually it's called the Steel Domain Wrestling School, run by Ace Steel, and that's where like CM Punk and Colt Cabana train. So when I called that number, they were actually going through a breakup, and the school had shut down. So the next guy on the list was a guy named Trevor Adonis, and he actually owned a gym like 20 minutes from where I lived. So I went there, and he told me to show up at this bar called Hog Alley, and it's $150. He'll give me a 2-hour fantasy like seminar, and if I like it, he'll train me. And my 2 hours turned into 4.5 hours. I just picked up on it right away. And then after a year or two with him, I had the opportunity to go do some Harley camps. He did those week-long camps, and Harley was like, "You need to move down here. Like, you need to come to my school. Like, I'll give you a scholarship. You got to do whatever you got to do." So I ended up packing up everything I could and moved to Eldon, Missouri, and trained with Harley. So I always tell everybody I went to grade school and high school with Trevor, and I went to college with Harley.
When you packed up your whole life pretty much and you moved across and you got over there and you started settling in with Harley, what was the training schedule like initially? Because it's one of those names in the wrestling business that it's over generations. The name Harley Race means something. So what was it like to when you first got there? What was the training schedule like with him?
So we trained every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, from 5 to 8 is was the training schedule. But I found out real early on, Harley would get to the school any day of the week. He'd get there between 10 and 10:30 in the morning. So I figured I'm going to show up as early as I can. So I get there around 10:30 and just sit in the office with Harley and pick his brain. And he would teach me how to talk to promoters. He would teach me how to handle my bookings, make my schedule. He would bring out the old booking sheets from Wrestling at the Chase, and he'd break down why they booked the show the way they did. We'd watch like some of his old matches, and he'd break the matches down and tell me why he did this and why he did that. Then I'd go to the gym, work out, or have lunch with him, get back to training at 4:30 and get ready for training. We trained till 8, and I usually stayed there till like 9 or 10 o'clock at night, just working out. Joe Henning was there at the same time I was, so him and I because he's from Minnesota, I'm from Wisconsin. We're like, hey, let's do this. We became really good friends, and man, it was just awesome. And then every time we had shows, I'd jump in Harley's car with him, and just like I said, I got as much FaceTime with Harley as I could just to pick his brain and find out and learn the business part of wrestling.
When you look at the traditions of pro wrestling, it's got I'll say the lore. That's a good way to put it. Of some of the things you're talking about, getting on the road, living the life, so to speak, and learning from the old guys. You don't hear quite so much about that in other sports, but one of the things that are being brought up, and I've asked a few guys, and I'm curious about your take on it. People say you can't compare an NBA player from like the 60s and the 70s to somebody today because the sports are very different.
Right.
A lot of guys are starting to say that about wrestling because I'm a purist. I always go back to the callbacks, the NWAs and stuff, because I'm like, oh, this reminds me of when they did this in Georgia or when they did this in Florida, And
Yeah.
I always call back. Do you think wrestling has reached a point as a sport where you can't compare what they were doing in the 60s, 70s, and 80s with Harley to what they're doing now in 2023?
No, so Harley always told us that you have to evolve with wrestling because wrestling evolves. If you think about it, like you're saying now, today is not like it was in the 80s and 90s. Well, the 80s and 90s weren't what it was like in the 50s and 60s, which it wasn't like in the 20s and 30s, and so you have to learn to evolve with it. And I've learned to evolve with it. And the way I look at it now is like when I broke in, I was trained by Harley, which is a territory guy, where everywhere he went, he had to prove himself and make himself a name. These kids that are breaking in nowadays, hell, some of them weren't even alive for the Monday Night Wars. You know what I mean? So everything they've seen is just WWE television wrestling. So that's what they want to emulate. So it takes guys like me and my generation to teach these kids, yeah, you can do some of that cool stuff, but you also got to do this because this is the time old, this is the true tradition. This is the way it works. This is proven over and over and over again. This works. So if you want to throw in all your little fancy moves and stuff, that's fine, but you still got to come back to the core of what professional wrestling is because the core of wrestling has never changed. Yes, now it's considered sports entertainment. You got to be a character and you got to do all that. But when it comes down to it, it's still good guy versus bad guy. And that's the way it's always been since the beginning of time.
So starting through training, now we're going to kind of look at the beginning of your career. You were kind of, you were after you've broke in, you've spent some time in the business. You get a call from Connecticut. They had you go up and work WWE a few times. What was it like getting that call? At that point in your career.
Oh, that was awesome. I was only like 3 years in when Ken Anderson, Mr. Kennedy, he was doing. I used to travel with him on the road, and he was always doing extra work. And there was something coming up where they needed a fat guy, basically. And Ken's like, "Oh, you're perfect." And he goes, "Hey, do you want to be on Raw on Monday?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, who doesn't?" He says, "Here's Tommy Dreamer's cell phone number. Give him a call. He's in charge of talent." I said, "Okay." So I called him. Tommy gave me all the information, and I rode with Ken to the thing. And it was the Simon Dean to be the plant in the crowd that Simon Dean calls out, and I trash his set, and he beats me up. And it was really cool because what it originally started as, he was just supposed to make fun of me in the crowd. But Ken got me in the ring before everything happened, was just rolling around with me, and JR and Paul Heyman were watching. And they're like, hey, this kid can do stuff. And I met Nova Simon beforehand, and he was watching, and he's like, okay. And they're like, do you think you want to do stuff with him? He's like, yeah, I think he'll be safe. So then they had me go, and at the time, Brooklyn Brawler was doing like promos, and they had Ken doing promos because they were looking at signing him. And so I went into the promo room with him, and Brawler's like, well, why don't you do one too? And I did, and it got back that I can talk. So they ended up giving me lines and stuff like that. So it morphed from me just being a plant in the crowd to what you saw on TV just because I got in the ring and did everything. And there's a really funny story with that so it's my first time there, and they don't know what I'm going to wear when I'm in the crowd. So Michael Hayes was the agent. So it's me, Nova, Michael Hayes, and Slaughter was there because Slaughter was in charge of all the extras and getting them where they need to be. and they're talking about what they should wear and stuff. And they're like, well, let's go ask Vince. So here I am, my first time backstage at Monday Night Raw, and I'm about to meet Vince McMahon, and like I'm terrified. And we're walking, and Nova looks at me and he goes, "You nervous?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Don't worry, I still get nervous too." And he's my, I'd been here for a while. And so we get up to Vince, and they're asking him, and I introduce myself, and they're asking him what he wants, what he wants me to wear and stuff. And he's like, "Well, we could do wear this button down shirt you got, and then he can take your shirt off, and he can play with your man titties. Like, is it okay if he says man titties?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I don't care." And I said, "But I wrestled Candido all weekend long, and he like lit my chest up with chops. So I literally had like
You still
blood
had like the whelps
blisters.
on your chest, right?
Yeah, and it was purple. And so I said, "Well, do you want like, is that okay?" And Vince is like, "Yeah, yeah, it's fine. We'll let's call it gonorrhea or something." And like, you see Michael Hayes, Slaughter, and Nova all looking around. Nobody wanted to correct him. You can't get gonorrhea on your chest, so they just kind of left it. And Nova looks over and goes, "Don't worry, I'll say something else." I'm like, "Okay, thanks." So that was like my first time like meeting him, and then I benefited because once I became good friends with Tommy, who was in charge of extras, and then when he left, Simon Dean took over. So since I already done that stuff with Simon, I kept in touch with him, and he's the one that kept giving me like the extra work. And I did security, I wrestled the Highlanders, Gemini, I've done 6-man stuff, and I was just constantly brought back all the way up until I signed with Ring of Honor. The last thing I did for them was I was the fake Bray Wyatt when Bray was feuding with Roman Reigns, and that's because John Cone had taken over, and I had trained with John Cone at Harley's. So he called me. He's like, "Hey, are you still a pretty fat guy with a beard?" I said, "Yeah, yeah, I am." He's like, "Well, you come to Raw and SmackDown." And I said, "Okay." So I show up, and he's like, "Oh, you're gonna do the Bray Wyatt thing. Just go shadow him." And it helps that Joe and Bray are like really good friends. So Joe introduced me to him, and I just followed him around and became friends with him. And he's like, "This is what you're gonna wear," and they gave me all the stuff I was supposed to wear. And I asked Cohen, I says, "You want me to do like the tryout matches and stuff?" He's like, "I already know you can work. If you want to try out, I'll give you a tryout, but like we know you can work." And so when I got all done with everything, they're like, "We can set up a tryout." But I had already had the offer from Ring of Honor, so I was like, "You know what? I'm gonna take the Ring of Honor deal." Like, kind of season myself there and see what happens.
So speaking of, you look at Ring of Honor, huge chunk of your career, historic promotion, still today evolving with wrestling, like we were talking about. And once again, bring him up, Brian. You guys have had a great history of tag team wrestling and Ring of Honor. When you guys were originally coming up, you weren't initially the bouncers. You guys wrestled together, but then when you adopted the name, when you see the two of you standing together, it makes absolute sense. But what was the process like coming up when you were building the tag team with Brian?
It was a fun process. So I met Brian before, because I was under contract for I think 2 years before he was brought in, and he's really good friends with Fat Pants Todd Sinclair. So I got to know Brian through that, and it turns out that Brian and I had a lot of stuff in common. Like, we just got along outside of the ring, and then in the ring we just had real good chemistry. And they were looking for a third person for me and Silas, to be the 6-man, because they just introduced the 6-man titles. And so um, Brian comes in and he's doing really good. And we ended up wrestling each other. And it was funny because we wrestled each other in Lowell, and somebody in the office had said, "Why are these guys wrestling each other? Why aren't they a tag team?" And the right person heard it. And the next thing you know, the next set of TV, they're like, "All right, Brian, you're going to wrestle Kenny King, who's in a feud with Silas. Bruiser and Silas are going to come down. Brian, you're going to turn on Kenny, and then you guys are all going to go together." And then it was just a matter of me and Brian just kind of ironing out our timing and figuring out, what we could do and stuff, because we had the same mentality when it came to wrestling. And then it was like, well, now we need a name, because that's how you can tell it's a true tag team. And we went through so much stuff, but we kept falling back on the bouncers. And because we were with Silas, it was kind of like, in order to get to Silas, you had to go through us. Just like if you're in a bar, to get into the bar, you gotta show your ID to the bouncer or whatever. and the name was born, and it was stuck. We left Silas and we kind of just went on our own, and the fans turned us baby faces after a while because we're two big guys that kick ass and drink beer.
What's
you
not to
know
love, right?
exactly. And then they turned us heel again when the pandemic hit because creative told us, they're like, hey, we have a lot of babyface tag teams, there's no fans here, so we're going to turn you guys heel. And we're like, okay, that's fine. And then that's what we did.
So you guys are still working together today. What's the chemistry like now versus where it was at when you guys got together? Still building every day, still just as strong?
Yeah, we don't have to talk now. When we, if we put matches together, if we're in the ring, we just need to look at each other and we know what's happening. Um, I still text him every day. He still texts me. Like, we still see each other as much as we did back in Ring of Honor as far as talking. And when we're on shows, if a guy comes up and, hey, I have this idea, I know what Brian's going to say, and Brian knows what I'm going to say. So we don't mind speaking for each other. And when we're in the ring, it's just, we know, okay, he's doing this. That means I'm going to do this. And he sees me do something and I'm going to do this. And it's just one of those things where it's like, cool. Like, I know he's got my back no matter what, and we're going to be okay.
So with your style of wrestling, stylistically, like I said at the beginning, you're the big guy, the mouth puncher. You mentioned Bruiser Brody and some of the guys in the AWA you watched. Did you watch a lot of tape? Do you still watch tape? Are there guys that you watched when you were young that you were like, that's what I want to do, this is how I want to try? Like, did you pick and choose from different people what you did to become the Beer City Bruiser?
Yeah, Brody obviously was a huge influence on me. Mick Foley is another one. Tommy Dreamer.
Love those guys.
Terry Gordy. When I discovered the Freebirds and Terry Gordy, like, I just was like, oh my God, this is it. Bam Bam Bigelow's another one. Scott Hall I took a lot from. And then Crusher, when I came up with the Bruiser gimmick, Crusher from the AWA, I stole a lot from. And what was really cool was when they did the Crusher Fest in Milwaukee and they unveiled the statue of him, Ring of Honor sent me in, and I couldn't wrestle because they had wrestling there. I couldn't wrestle, but I could do a promo and stuff like that. And I did the promo, and his family approached me and gave me permission and said, it's awesome what you're doing with the keg and the cigar because you're doing it the right way, and our dad would have been proud of you. So they kind of gave me permission to do it, and that was like a huge honor for me to do that. And to this day, I watch some current stuff, but I go back and I'll watch all the old stuff. I'll watch as much Brody as I can, and I'm really in like I said, a Bam Bam kick right now. And the Outsiders I'm watching a lot of right now for some reason, just because I go through phases.
I love the old WCW stuff. I've been watching a ton of old WCW for a project that I'm just getting off the ground that's covering the history of it. So a lot of the guys you're talking about, I'm like, yeah, especially that 95, 96, 97 leading up to Hogan's turn.
Yeah.
Loved that primo. I grew up watching like I said, NWA, WCW stuff. I'm from Nashville originally, so I cut my teeth in it.
Yeah.
During your time of Ring of Honor, you guys had a stacked roster from the beginning, from when it first started all the way through today. You kind of went through a who's who of opponents while you were there. This is a two-part question for you. Who is one person you'd love to have a chance to run it back with, and who is one person you never had a chance to lock it up with that you wish you did?
The person that I would love to lock up with again, it's actually a tag team. That's the Briscoe brothers. We did lose Jay. Unfortunately, but whenever the Bouncers were against, or even Silas and I against the Briscoes, I knew we were going to have a great match, but I also knew I was going to feel it for a week because those guys are legit, man. And I have not had a bad match with them. They were very welcoming when I first started with the company, and they realized, hey, this guy can go. And I worked both of them in singles. I worked them in tags. I worked them in 6-mans. We did 10-mans. I mean, other than Cheeseburger, I think I wrestled the Briscoes the most in Ring of Honor. One guy I wish I could have locked up with, at the time when AJ Styles was there, I would have really loved to do something like that. Or as far as tag team, before the pandemic, we were supposed to wrestle GOD, the Guerrillas of Destiny. It was supposed to be the Bouncers versus Guerrillas of Destiny. And we were amped and hyped to do that, and we were all set, ready to go. And then when COVID hit and the pandemic shut down, everything changed. So I really wish we could have had that match, because the whole thing was that they did this thing with the Briscoes, and then they were supposed to come to us. They were going to win the titles and then come to us, and then we were going to do something with them, and then the Briscoes going to be introduced again. And it was like, man, just the combination of matches we all could have, it's going to be amazing. And COVID ruined it.
COVID ruined a lot of things. I was in the
Yeah.
restaurant industry before I did this, and COVID is, COVID and a few other factors are the reason, because the restaurant industry got shit on. And I say that a
Yeah.
lot because independent wrestling did too. And
Yeah.
it was felt from the bottom all the way up to the top, from the Outlaw shows all the way up to Ring of Honor and Impact. And some of those guys felt it hard.
Yeah.
One of the things you just brought up, you're killing the segues tonight for me. I love it. It makes my job super easy. When you were with Ring of Honor, you guys did some work with New Japan,
Yeah.
a couple of big super shows. What was it like kind of getting that international audience eyes on your product and kind of working with those guys? Because you cross paths with a couple of guys that are huge in Japan, and some of the American fans might be scratching their head going, who? But like, if you watch wrestling, you know who they are. What was it like, getting international eyes on the product?
Man, it was a dream come true, because growing up as a Brody fan and a Cactus Jack fan, like
Huge in Japan.
they made their name in Japan. And when I got to go over to Japan and I got to wrestle in Cork and Hall, like that was a huge honor to me, because that's literally where those guys cut their teeth and made their name. And then the guys that we were put up against, like you said, it's the who's who of New Japan, and it was really cool to have that honor. And the Japanese wrestlers, they're so big on respect and word of mouth and stuff, that if you screw one guy over, you hurt somebody, you're never going to work with them. So they started us off with just a few little guys, and then all of a sudden, here we are working Suzuki, we're working with Liger, we're working with Goto Goto, and it's like, this is awesome, like we're doing this, like. And then in Japan, I got to do. So I worked Hiroki Goto the first night for the Never Openweight Championship, which was a dream come true, because I'm wrestling for a New Japan title in Japan, in Cork and Hall, which is like,
That's a bucket list check mark, man. Like,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
huge.
In fact, that was on my bucket list. Like when I got back from Japan, to kind of segue, when I got back from Japan, my wife looks at me and goes, "So now what? You've done pretty much your bucket list. What's left?" And I said, "Oh, the only thing left is Madison Square Garden, and I don't think I'll ever wrestle in Madison Square Garden." And then a few weeks later is when Ring of Honor announces that we're wrestling at Madison Square Garden. So it was like, oh my God, this can't, it was like a pinch me moment. But back to Japan, when I was there, so the first night I wrestled Hiroki, and we had a great match. And he walks up to me, and I do this DVD on the apron. And he goes, Bruiser-san, Naito say DVD on apron, very safe. Will you give to me? And I was like, yeah, I'll be more, yeah, like, and that's like a huge compliment, because I'd done so well with Naito in Toronto. In fact, when I got backstage after the Naito match, BJ Whitmer walks up to me and goes, "You need to thank him." And I says, "Why?" He goes, "He bumped his ass off for you, and he sold. And in Japan, they don't do that unless they like you." So I was just constantly thanking Naito, and he was like, "Oh, no." And then that's how I got introduced to like all these other guys. So the second night I'm in Japan, I work Hanrei, who was just a young boy at the time, and we're opening match, like 7 minutes. I'm over, and it's like, okay, I get done with my match, I come back, and Delirious, the booker from Ring of Honor, goes, "Hey, we need to see you in the office." And I'm like, "Oh, great, I'm getting fired. Like I did something."
It's like getting called to the principal's office when you're in school,
Yeah.
right?
And when I walk in the room, there's the president of Sinclair, the president of Ring of Honor, there's Delirious the booker, there's Gato the booker for New Japan, the president for New Japan, and the vice president of New Japan. And I'm like, "Yep, I'm getting fired.
I'm
This
going
is like,
home.
yep." And Delirious goes, "Hey, we were wondering if you can work again tonight." And I was like, "What do you mean?" They're like, "Well, the main event's supposed to be Dalton Castle versus Trent, but Dalton's back is injured, and Trent tore his bicep and his pectoral muscle. And they don't think they can put on a 20-minute match. So they'd like a third guy." And we were talking, and we want it to be you. And I was like, "Yeah, I'll do it." And they're like, "Okay, it's in like a half hour. You're going to have to go out there." And Gato goes, "Oh, and please go cut a promo." And I'm like, I don't know Japanese. He's like, no, you cut a promo. They'll understand. I'm like, okay. So I went from just having the one match to going out, cutting a promo, and then going 30 minutes for the Ring of Honor World Championship. And I was in the ring. If you watch that match back, I'm in the ring the full 30 minutes.
Both guys are injured, you
Yeah.
know? Like, yeah.
And the match gets back, and I come back, and I'm exhausted. And Gato walks up to me, and he hugs me, and he's like, very good. He goes, you're a workhorse. And he calls me whatever the Japanese word is for workhorse. He goes, from now on, that's what we call you. So this day, whenever I see a New Japan guy, that's what they call me. Because I guess in Japan, it's not normal, unless it's a tournament, to wrestle more than once in a night.
I love stories like that, especially when you hear about the guys that go over there and they have the what do they call it? The gaijin?
Yeah.
The foreigners who come into Japanese wrestling. I love the history of New Japan. Stylistically, it's like, you know, they use it fusion a lot in the culinary world. It's where you blend like the Far East food, like Japanese food and Southern food together. Your very Bruiser Brody style of brawling that you do got over so well in Japan when he was there. What was it like blending the two styles when you were there? Was it just as easy for you to blend your the bruising style, like get out there and just this, pound with the Japanese strong style? Was it as easy for you to blend it as it was for him when he was over there?
Yeah, because I looked up to him and I looked up to the strong style so much. And I remember when I first got over there, Kevin Kelly, who's a mentor of mine, I was sitting with him at breakfast, and he says, I don't know what I'm going to do. Like, I'm real nervous. He goes, what? He goes, you're a Brody guy. I said, yeah. He goes, you're a Gordy guy. I said, yeah. He goes, what'd they do? I was like, okay. And he goes, go get over. You know what you're doing. And that's why when I came out, I'd spit the beer in the air and I'd chase after them, and because that's what those guys did. And so that's what I did. And then having that first match with Hiroki the first night, I got to learn, this is how it's done over here. And it, he was very good at showing me that way. And it was so cool because when I got done, our hotel was attached to Cork and Hall. So we had to walk from Cork and Hall over to the hotel. And when I walk out, there's a line of fans out there. And they all have beer. And they walk up and they're like, how much for you to spit in our face? And I was like, huh? And they're like, how much? So I'm like, I don't know. And I said some number. So they'd pay me and then they hand me beer and they'd wait for me to open it up and spit in their face. And literally, I didn't have to pay for beer the whole trip I was there because they just kept handing me beer. Well, you don't need that much beer to spit in someone's face. So I only had like one or two beers that I'd actually used to spit in the face, and the rest I just kept and put in my hotel room.
Just free booze.
Exactly.
Huge question here. This is more of a fan question on my side of things. When you go to the 2300, Ring of Honor did tons of work there. Lots of promotions still go through. What was it like? Is it as electric for you guys coming through the curtain as it is for the fans sitting in the crowd for a show at the 2300?
Yeah, it is. And I grew up with ECW, so my first time there, I couldn't believe it. And then Steve Carino was another mentor of mine, said, you're over if you can get over at the 2300 because they will let you know if they like
They'll
you or
eat you
they
alive.
hate you. Yeah, if they think you're the shits, they will let you know you're the shits. And they loved to hate me. So like I got over, but I was a heel, so it worked. And they're some of my favorite fans is Philadelphia. And the bouncers, actually, we have a soft spot for the 2300 arena because that's where we formed. That's where we main evented for the first time. It was a 6-man. It was Silas, me, and Brian against the Bucks, Young Bucks, and Cody in a 6-man. And it was a main event on a Ring of Honor show for TV. You know what I mean? At the 2300. So it was like, this is awesome. And then we turned babyface there. And like a lot of stuff happened to us in that building. So I hold it even more close. And then my favorite memory of all that was we were there and I got to watch Sandman do his full Sandman entrance in the ECW arena. And he went and that's when he kendo stick Silas and all that. But it was like you heard Enter Sandman playing like Metallica. Like they're like, we know we can't play this on TV, but we got to do this. This we'll dub in some crappy music, but this is what we got. And it was like, and to see those fans and the energy, and it was like, oh, this is amazing. And I got to go back after Ring of Honor closed for Monster Factory, and it's still the same feeling. Even though it wasn't as big of a company as Ring of Honor, it's still the building has so much history.
Just that feeling about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And anytime you see somebody take a picture and where it says ECW and has the date underneath it, that's in the men's bathroom. So anytime that you see women doing it, because my wife wanted to go do it, and I'm like, all right. And she's like, where are you going? I'm like, well, you gotta go in the men's bathroom because that's where it is. So anytime you see like a woman or some girl, chicks or little kids,
Posing
or
with the
whatever,
picture, they had to go to the
yeah,
men's room for it.
yep, it's right inside the men's room.
When I was doing my due diligence, this one right here, touched close to home. You recently had a chance to work with Jerry Lawler, man.
Yeah.
That's pretty big. I'm from Tennessee, like I said, Memphis, Lawler, Jarrett country, like that's right in my backyard. What was it like having a chance to lock up with a different king of wrestling that wasn't, King Harley Race?
It was easy, and we had the crowd in the palm of our hands. And I remember when we first locked up, he's like, "Well, this will be an easy night." And I'm like, "Yeah, well," because the cool thing about the North Carolina fans is they appreciate tradition in wrestling. So when the older guys come in, they know, and they all remember me from Ring of Honor. So they, being the heel and stuff, they hate my guts. And him coming in, and we just went out there and just did magic, and it was fun. And if you look at the history books, I'm actually his last match ever because he had the stroke a week later. Um, but yeah, it was a nice, easy match. It was fun. He liked it. I liked it. And the promoters liked it. The fans liked it. So it was just really cool to be in the ring with a guy like that and then get through the curtain and be like, is anything you think I need to work on? He's like, no. He's like, you need to get a job someplace. I'm like, well, I was with Ring of Honor till they closed. He's like, they shouldn't have closed.
I like hearing that. It's sad what happened, but when I was doing my work, I didn't realize that you were his last match. That's a huge notch in the cap for everything we've talked about up to this point.
Yeah.
It looks like we've done all the damage we can do. But I can't let you off the hook. I always close all of my interviews with 5 random questions that typically have nothing to do with wrestling. You ready?
All right. Yeah.
All right, your first one does. So I'll let you off the hook. 4 that don't and 1 that does. What's your favorite venue you've ever had a chance to wrestle in?
3-way tie, 4-way tie, 2300 Arena, Corrigan Hall, Madison Square Garden, and then Turner Hall in Milwaukee.
Solid picks. Do you have a favorite movie?
Yes, The Crow, starring Brandon Lee, is one of my favorites, and then The Hangover. I love The Hangover.
This doesn't count, but just out of curiosity, do you prefer the Crow Sting or Surfer Sting?
Crow Sting, because when I was a kid, it was Surfer Sting, but right as I hit that teenage years, I could really connect with the angsty Sting, the brooding and dwelling, and then I was such a fan of the movie, Crow Sting all the way.
Who's your favorite musical artist?
Tool, the band Tool. I love them. Seen them twice now. They're just perfect. Adam Jones is one of the best guitarists out there. Maynard's got one of the best voices, and Danny Carey's probably the greatest drummer still alive.
I'm a big Tool guy. I've seen them a few times. I saw them at Bonnaroo in 2007. It's still my favorite concert I've ever been to ever, was seeing them. That was when they did the outdoor stadium show with the laser lights. 10,000 Days hadn't been out long. It was primo.
I did the Fear Inoculum tour, and I saw them twice in Kansas City and in Milwaukee, and both shows were amazing, but they were still different. And it was like, that's why I love bands like that.
For sure. This is random, but it's a serious question. Do you think a hot dog is a sandwich?
Yeah, because you got two loaves of bread. Because I grew up poor, man. So if we didn't have buns, we just took white bread.
Just white bread with a hot dog and a little bit of mustard. That's
exactly.
it.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a sandwich.
Last one. Are there any conspiracy theories you think hold water?
Yes. There's a few. Cause my wife's a big conspiracy theorist, and so am I. But
me too.
Yeah. I think there's more than one shooter for JFK. And the Malaysian Airlines, they just released that documentary on Netflix. There's a couple of, if you watch I'm not going to ruin the documentary for everybody, but they go through there's 5 conspiracy theories they go through, and 2 of them I think could be legit after watching that documentary.
All right. Well, this is everybody's favorite part of the episode because I don't have to say anything. I just need you to plug your stuff, put yourself over, tell everybody what you got coming up.
Cool. Yeah. I do a podcast with my buddy Tim Dennis. It's called Darkness Radio. You can find that anywhere you listen to podcasts. We do a true crime thing on Tuesdays, and then on Wednesdays we do a paranormal, supernatural thing. You can follow me on Twitter at BCB Winchester. Facebook is the Beer City Bruiser. Instagram's Beer City Bruiser. TikTok's Beer City Bruiser. But all you're gonna get is videos of my dogs because I love my dogs. Cameo, I'm on Cameo, which is Beer City Bruiser, and ProWrestlingTees.com/Beer City Bruiser to get my t-shirts and stuff. And then this weekend I'm going to be in North Carolina for AML Wrestling. I'm wrestling another legend of the business, George South.
I just saw him work in Chattanooga for the SCI Rumble.
Yeah, he is a famous job guy from the area. So going to wrestle with him. And then Sunday we're doing a unique show where the fans get to choose who wrestles who. They're going to put all the names in a hat and then draw them out. So the guys in the back don't know who they're wrestling until the fans choose it. They're doing a 100% fans choice for the match.
That sounds freaking amazing.
Yeah, and they promise there'll be two tag team matches, a triple threat match, two singles matches, and a battle royal.
That sounds awesome. Well, I appreciate you taking the time out of your evening and sitting down and chatting about some wrestling with me, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
For the Beer City Bruiser, I am the Will Gray. Thanks for stopping by and listening, my people.